Hi everyone, in this video we're going to continue with the Catalan, and this time our focus is the Closed Catalan, which arises after moves d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to f3, knight to f6, g3, bishop e7, bishop g2, castling, castling, and c6. So make sure to watch this video till the end because there will be also a nice exercise for you. And if you didn't watch the previous video, you can look at it. There we have discussed main ideas of Catalan and some critical positions within the open Catalan direction. Now for the closed Catalan, what is the most important idea behind it and why Black is playing this passive c6 move? So the major thing that is happening here, and we have discussed it in the previous video, is the fight for the lone diagonal. So White is going to exploit this diagonal at some point, and of course White's natural desire is to have this diagonal open. Black hence is doing everything to keep this diagonal closed, making the bishop on g2 as passive as possible. Yes, it comes at the price of, making the bishop c8 not that great because now it is indeed limited with own pawns. But if you play this correctly, you'll see that it's not a big problem to activate this bishop. The general philosophy here is that the activity in the center starts only after Black is completely developed and everything is ready. So after c6, sometimes Black may think of even taking on c4 and then supporting that pawn with the b7, b5. So normally White is trying to support this pawn right now, but sometimes, just like in majority of Catalan lines, White doesn't pay real attention to that pawn because White is ready to sacrifice it right from the start. So such an approach is like knight to c3. So if you want to take on c4, you can do it. But according to philosophy we have discussed already, Black is not doing anything active in the center before this is ready. For now, the major problem is to activate the bishop. That's why Black cares about that and plays b6 move. A flexible one, because after that the bishop can go to both b7 and a6. And this depends, in fact, because sometimes bishop is needed exactly on b7 to support d5, for example, in controlling e4 square. Sometimes it's better placed on a6 to attack c4 and hence forcing White to clarify the things in the center. A rule of thumb here is that if White's knight is already on c3, not on d2, not on b1, then probably a6 is a better place because exactly in this case it's easier to attack c4. We'll have a look at the difference once we get to the queen to c2 line. For now, it's just important to know that once the knight is on c3, well, in the vast majority of cases, bishop should aim to a6. So here, White has different options. I want to focus on just one of them. It is b3 move, which is very solid. White is not sacrificing the pawn anymore. And continues with the development. So one may argue that, okay, there is f4 square, but f4 is not necessarily the best one, although it looks much more active than, for example, b2. But on f4, the bishop is much more vulnerable. Black may think of something like knight h5, attacking it and forcing it somewhere anyway. So b3 is good in this sense, and another idea is just to support c4 to make sure it's not lost and gradually prepare e4. So that's White's main plan here, because since diagonal a8, h1 is closed, and White's major plan is to make the bishop active, now White needs some ideas to open this diagonal or to try to do that. And the most natural one is to try to play e4, forcing Black to take, and then diagonal becomes open. That's the idea. So Black may continue with the development. Knight goes to d7 here. And now White has several options. Let's have a look at the most consistent one after b3, for example, bishop to b2. In this case, as I said before, it's better to develop the bishop to a6, not to b7, because on b7 it will be too passive. Here it's quite good. So pawn is hanging. Obviously, if white captures on d5, it only simplifies the position and gives white absolutely nothing. So knight to d2 looks logical, protecting the pawn on c4 and preparing e4 at the same time. And it's already a sign that black should do something immediately, because if black is waiting for one more move, white may grab space and it may be just not that pleasant. So black has this b5 move here, and it is one of the typical options of how to fight against white's center. So it is definitely the move on the side, but as you can see, the idea is to force changes in the center here. Again, capturing either b5 or d5 doesn't give white anything, so the most logical continuation is to play c5, grabbing space. And if white manages to play something like b4 here, then black is just busted, especially if the bishop is quite bad. So that's important to be able to play b4 right after you played b5 in this and similar situations. Knight goes to a4, then bishop to b5. As you can see, black is just controlling the situation on the queen side, everything is fine. Rook goes to e1, probably preparing e4 gradually. Then queen may go to c7. Black may also think of playing e5 at some point, and after something like a3, trying to change the situation with that pawn before black may support it with the a5. It feels like black is just doing all right here. Neither of these sides is better in this situation. White still has a bit more space, but I think it's not that critical. Let's have a look at the other option, which is queen to c2. So in this position, instead of playing bishop to b2, white may try queen to c2 move. Also an interesting square for queen, supporting e4 and also being able to protect c4 whenever it is attacked. Bishop may go to a6 again, and after knight to d2, b5, this typical move we have seen already, becomes even better, because now if, imagine white plays something like c5, b4 not only unleashes the bishop, it actually wins a pawn, because after knight moves away, queen, which was initially on d1 protecting it, is no longer there. So c5 is not possible, which means the situation changes in the center. After e4 move, black captures on c4 with the b5 pawn, and then puts the knight on b6, now improving the situation for minor pieces. So as you can see, both the knight and the bishop attack c4. If pawn ever moves to c5 or something, this c4 square may be used as a nice outpost for both minor pieces. And also pay attention that black didn't even think about taking on e4. That is exactly what black should avoid here, because exactly this capture opens the diagonal, and that is what white wants to achieve and black wants to prevent. So normally, black is going to do everything to keep this diagonal closed. Again, repeating the main idea behind Closed Catalan. So white may try e5. That is something that black should be ready to, because if you don't take on e4, well, this pawn can move, and the knight goes away. Sometimes it's better to put it on d7, sometimes on e8, sometimes it doesn't really matter. In this particular case, the thing is, black is going to capture on c4 at some point, and then d5 will be empty, and the knight will be much more logical here on e8, being able to go to d5 through c7. So after rook to d1, in one of the games, black just captured on c4. After bishop to f1, the knight was pinned, otherwise it would have been just extra pawn for nothing. Now knight to c7, now you can see the idea. Knight takes c4, bishop captures on c4, bishop captures on c4, pawn captures on c4. So this pawn is definitely weak and it will be most likely lost, but after queen a4 and knight to d5, black is getting very comfortable position. After queen captures on c4, knight takes on c3, queen takes on c3, and then queen gets to d5. So as you may notice, black's only problem is this c6, which is a backward at the moment, but it is compensated with white's backward pawn on d4. Also, black's bishop is slightly better than white's one, so white's advantage in space is not that critical here. I would say that position is pretty much balanced. Now let's get to the main direction within this b3 line, which is knight to d2, which is the most logical. So exactly in this situation, white plays knight to d2, protecting c4 pawn in advance, and at the same time preparing e4 move. So that is the main idea behind this setup. Black may react in different ways. One of them is just to play bishop to a6 anyway, preparing b5, the move that we have discussed already. But the difference here is that white already can play e4 because c4 is protected in advance. And that is a critical position, so you may find various games here and the stats are normally a bit better for white. But that is the spirit of this opening. So you may get a slightly worse position as black here, but it's not that worse. So that's it makes it simply impossible to play or something. But you kind of want to provoke white to play for win, which inevitably gives you your chances. So it's more like a practical choice here. And for white, yeah, it's a great position with some sort of advantage in space, but there are also some problems because if you push your pawns too far, they may become a simple target in the future. For instance, here, once again, black is not reacting to this e4. It would be a positional mistake to take on e4, where after black will have just very bad pawn structure, white will have advantage in the center, and the diagonal will be open, which violates the principle of closed Catalan. So black usually responds with a rook to c8 move, just waiting for white's next move, and gradually preparing the counterattack. Once again, everything is ready, every piece is developed, so the counterattack may be considered. White may try e5 here. If white is waiting, for example, rook to e1, just overprotecting everything, position may easily become much more dynamic. For example, here, after bishop to b4 and bishop to b2, black may start this counterattack in the center with a c5. It appears that knight to d2 was perfect to support c4 and e4, but it also made d4 quite vulnerable, and black is using exactly this fact here. So whatever happens to pawns right now in the center, there will be always either capture on d4 with the tempo, or if this pawn goes away, for example, black may have resources like this. Now you can see, by the way, white was so important to bring the rook to c8, because in similar lines there will be also a problem for black with the rook on a8, something like that. So not necessarily in this position, but ideas like e5 would have been quite dangerous for black with the rook on a8. Once it is on c8, there is no danger in opening the diagonal and getting some active counterplay in the center. So that's the philosophy here. So instead of playing this rook to e1, white may continue with immediate e5 move, grabbing the space, and the knight goes to e8. Looks terrible at first glance, but you should understand that it's only for one move that black has this passive position. The next will be just knight to c7, relocating a bit and supporting d5. And you can see that all black needs to do here is just to make sure d5 is not hanging. And it will be possible to continue with the c6, c5. Just imagine it is possible to do, and positions of the knights on d7 and c7 will make perfect sense to you, because exactly from here the knights support these pawns. So as I said, everything that black needs here is to make sure d5 is not hanging, maybe with the help of even bishop to b7 back, and then c5 may become a serious threat. So that is one of the typical positions here in closed Catalan, with knights on d7, c7, and c5 coming as a threat. So if you analyze it deeper, you'll understand that, well, it's not so simple for white to prove that they're better, and it gives black some good counterattacking chances. So literally, this position is great for both colors. Let's have a look at the other direction. So as you can see, white is preparing e4. There is another way to do that. So white may put the knight not on c3, but on d2, and this may be even a bit more logical and faster way to play e4. Let's get there. So in this position, White has several move orders leading to the same situation. Let's have a look at queen to c2, which looks very natural here. So the point is, White is going to put the knight on d2, next move, and then the next move will be already e4. So that's the plan behind this piece's placement. So Black may continue with the b6, but after knight to d2, in this particular case, position of the bishop on a6 will be no longer that logical, because there will be indeed no pressure on c4 anymore. So just compare it to the position of the knight on c3. In this case, c4 is really vulnerable, and by putting the bishop on a6, you may really force White at some point to take on d5. That's what you want. A simplification and opening of this a6, f1 diagonal for your bishop. When the knight is on d2, though, it's highly unlikely that you ever force White to do something like that. Which means White will anyway play something like e4 sooner or later, and it's probably better for you to prepare for that in the slightly other way. And Black has a very interesting approach here. The main expert with Black pieces in playing it is Sergei Tivakov. So if you ever want to play something like this with Black, or you want to get some system against it with White, you should pay closer attention to Tivakov's games. So after bishop to b7, White indeed may play e4, and just like we have seen already, Black is not reacting to that, and instead develops the knight to a6. Very interesting square, to be honest. From here, the knight, just like from d7, supports c5 at some point. It will be possible for Black to try it, but in addition to that, it doesn't occupy d7 square, so that if White plays something like e5, let's have a look at that one, Black may play knight to d7, so avoiding this e8 square. But to be completely honest, it's not a big and crucial difference, because now at some point, if knight doesn't have great perspectives here, it may go to c7, and you will get same knights on d7 and c7. The only difference is that they are literally different. So instead of moving the one from b8 to d7 and another from f6 to c7, you do it the other way, but as a result, you get the same position, all right? So mainly a question of taste. But the knight on a6 indeed has some additional options compared to d7 position. So here, there are several options for White. For example, cd5, with the idea of stabilizing everything in the center and playing sort of, French version of sorts. Well, it doesn't work at all with the knight here, because after knight b4 attacking the queen, and queen to b3, Black captures on d5 with the knight, getting an amazing outpost for a minor piece. This is just a great position for Black. c5 follows, and Black has no problems. Only White has to be very careful to equalize it. So cd5 doesn't work in this situation. Another option for White is to play a3 to prevent knight to b4 here. And in this case, Black may try immediate c5. Again, as you can see, knights are perfect supporting the c5. d5 is supported by the bishop, so everything seems ready. And after White's capturing on d5 or c5, Black may consider taking with pawns. For example, if White captures on c5, Black captures with the b6 pawn, and after rook to e1, for example, knight goes to c7. And if something like cd5 ever happens, then the knight will get amazing position on e6. If, for example, White does something like knight to b3 here, then rook to b8, knight to a5, bishop can go to a8. Again, there is a pressure in the center. Black is controlling the situation. So after something like knight to b6, we have a complex position, which is, again, playable for both White and Black. But as you can see, it no longer looks that passive, right? Once Black made something like c5, actually made some active transformation in the center, it no longer feels like a passive system at all. Another option for White is to take on a d5, which is also completely fine for black. Let's have a look at that one. So in this position, for instance, c takes d5. I believe that something like bishop takes d5 can be also considered, but at the same time, e takes d5 looks pretty convincing because now there is a pressure in the center, and the only problem here is the knight on a6. But as I said before, when something like this happens, there is always this amazing square on e6 where the knight will be just perfect. Stopping e5, blockading it, and attacking d4. For example, after d takes c5, b takes c5, b3. We get the pattern with hanging pawns, but it's a bit different one because normally the pawn is on e3, now it is on e5 already, which means black has a passer. And after something like bishop b2 and knight to e6, I think it's even optically clear that black is doing great here. So c5 and d5 are protected, and some of them are even overprotected. And black is ready to bring other pieces closer to the center and at some point bring pawns to motion. So doesn't mean that white's position is worse. Once again, stable, normal, interesting position to try it with both colors. Let's have a look now at the moment right after knight to a6 move where white can try immediate a3, not clarifying the situation in the center. So in this position, instead of clarifying the things in the center, basically just closing it with the e5, which, as we have seen already, gives black a clearer plan of undermining activity based on c5, which is pretty logical if you think about it. Right now there is a pressure against d5, and once white plays e5, although it grabs some space, but it leaves d5 no longer under attack of that pawn, which means c5 becomes much easier to play. So instead of doing that, white may try a3 here, preventing black from playing knight to b4. And another idea behind this move is to play b4. Well, sometimes black may tolerate that and say, okay, you can play b4, I will play c5 anyway a bit later after it. But some people say that, okay, it will be too much of a space advantage for white, and thus play c5 immediately here before white managed to do that. So after c5, well, as for my preference, I like to do this only after the rook is on c8. That's why I may prefer playing rook c8, although I allow white to play b4. But again, this c5 is also absolutely valid choice, and maybe even easier to understand, looks more logical. So after c5, e captures d5 and e captures d5. White may continue with different things. For example, here, if white captures on c5, unlike in previous lines we have discussed, it's probably a better choice for black to take with a piece. Because in this case, if you take with the pawn and white captures on d5 at some point, you'll have an isolated pawn. That is probably something you want to avoid. So taking with the knight here looks better. And then after b4, the knight lands on e6 again, the square, which is quite good for the knight. We have seen this already. After bishop to b2, black may continue with the a5, and after b5, play rook to c8 with a complex fight. And something really similar happens if white is not taken on c5 immediately, but tries to bring the rook to the center first. Let's have a look at that. So in this position, white may play rook to d1, just waiting a bit, maybe trying to provoke black to capture on d4 and c4. So in this case, it's exactly the time for rook to c8, again bringing the rook to the c file, preparing this play along it, especially against c4. So now it's probably time for white to do something like d takes c5, and once again we get something very similar. So knight takes c5, b4, knight goes to e6, and after bishop to b2, a5 still deserves attention, because if white does something like b5, it gives black very good square on c5 that can be used by the bishop, by the knight, and other pieces. Once again, this position is quite complex. It requires better analysis and much more practice to master it. The more you analyze and play it, the more you understand, the more patterns you get to remember and recognize. So just try it. You will not regret. And now it's time for the exercise. let's get there. So we have been talking about some additional options for the knight a6 once it gets there compared to d7. And now it's time to understand why these options actually matter. So what happens if white plays b3 here? So we have discussed e5, we have discussed a3, preventing knight to b4. But knight to b4 doesn't look that dangerous, so why not playing something like b3, preparing the development of the bishop to say b2? That's your task here. You should understand what black is doing here to find the best series of moves and try to understand why, in fact, playing something like a3 is a good practice. The solution to this exercise will be published in a separate video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to be notified about it. And you can always share your thoughts about it in the comments below. Thanks a lot for watching. See you.